Imagine the world of the 19th century. Factories rumbling, cities expanding, new machines reshaping daily life. Science was advancing rapidly, peeling back the mysteries of the universe. The old certainties, religion, tradition, inherited wisdom were beginning to tremble under the weight of discovery. It is in this restless century that Friedrich Nietzsche was born, a thin, fragile man, often plagued by illness, but with a mind that burned with a fire so bright that it continues to unsettle and inspire more. Then 100 years after his death, Nietzsche was not like other philosophers who calmly built logical systems, neat and tidy, like architects of thought. No, Nietzsche wrote in bursts, in aphorisms, in thunderbolts. His words feel alive, like sparks flying from a storm. He wasn't just trying to explain the world. He wanted to revalue it, to overturn everything people thought they knew about morality, truth, and meaning. Think of Nietzsche as a philosopher of extremes. He lived in solitude, without wealth, without fame, often misunderstood by those around him, and yet, in that isolation, he wrote some of the most daring, unsettling works of philosophy ever produced. Thus spoke Zarathustra, beyond good and evil. The birth of tragedy. He is often remembered as the man who declared, "God is dead." But that line, misunderstood and simplified, was not a celebration, it was a warning. Nietzsche wasn't a destroyer without purpose. He was more like a doctor diagnosing the sickness of his time, the collapse of belief, the erosion of meaning, the growing void inside modern life. As you listen tonight, picture Nietzsche not as a distant, cold thinker, but as a man wrestling with the same questions you may have whispered to yourself when lying awake. Why am I here? What gives life meaning if the old answers no longer satisfy? How do I create purpose when nothing seems fixed or certain? Nietzsche, fragile yet fierce, tried to confront these questions head-on. He sought not comfort, but clarity, not easy answers, but the courage to face the abyss of meaninglessness and to find, within that abyss, the possibility of rebirth. And so, tonight, let us walk slowly into his world, into his restless search for truth, into the shadows and the light of a man who wanted us not merely to live, but to live more deeply, more intensely, more awake. Nietzsche's view on life and meaning. If we listen carefully to Nietzsche, we notice something striking. He never wanted us to run away from life, to hide from its pain, or to numb ourselves with false comforts. Instead, he asked us to face life directly, to embrace it, even in its darkest, most difficult moments. Nietzsche looked at human existence and saw suffering everywhere: illness, loss, disappointment, failure, loneliness. These were not accidents to him. They were not things to be avoided at all costs. They were woven into the very fabric of being alive. To live is to suffer. But here is where Nietzsche's brilliance appears. Instead of teaching us to escape from suffering, he argued that suffering could become the very source of strength, creativity, and transformation. He wrote, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." What does this mean? Imagine a sculptor standing before a block of marble. The marble resists every strike of the chisel. It is hard and yielding. But it is precisely through that resistance that the artist creates form, beauty, something higher. Nietzsche saw human life the same way. Suffering is the marble, hard, cold, often painful. But it is only through this resistance, through this struggle, that we can carve ourselves into something greater. For Nietzsche, the true tragedy of life is not suffering itself, but running away from it. When people avoid hardship, when they cling to shallow comforts, when they deny the reality of pain, they become small, they shrink, they lose the chance to grow into who they truly could be. This is why Nietzsche admired the great artists, poets, and heroes of history. They did not become great by avoiding life's difficulties. They became great by transforming pain into art, into philosophy, into music, into courage. Think of Beethoven composing symphonies while deaf. Think of Dostoevsky writing masterpieces after years of imprisonment and near execution. For Nietzsche, these were examples of humans saying yes to life even in the face of its cruelties. And here lies one of his most famous ideas, amor fati, the love of fate. Nietzsche did not simply want us to tolerate our lives. He wanted us to embrace them so fully that we would love them, with all their joys and all their pains, as if we ourselves had chosen them. To say, in every moment, this is my life, and I would live it again, exactly as it is. This was Nietzsche's radical view of meaning, not a meaning given from outside by religion, by tradition, by authority, but a meaning that we create for ourselves through the way we face life, through the courage with which we endure, and the passion with which we affirm existence. And so, as you lie here, listening in the quiet, let Nietzsche's words invite you to reflect. What if every challenge you faced, every loss, every difficulty, was not a mistake, but part of the raw material of your life sculpture? What if your task was not to erase those struggles, but to shape them into strength, into wisdom, into beauty? The death of God and its implications. Few phrases in all of philosophy are as haunting, as provocative, as God is dead. Nietzsche first wrote these words in The Gay Science and later echoed them in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. But what did he mean? Was he simply declaring himself an atheist? Was it an insult, a rebellion, a blasphemy? Not exactly. Nietzsche was not merely speaking about religion. He was pointing to something much deeper, the very foundation of Western culture. For centuries, society found order, morality, and meaning in God. The idea of God was like the sun round which all human values revolved. To believe in God was to believe in a higher purpose, a universal truth, a moral structure that guided life. But by Nietzsche's time, science, rational inquiry, and modern skepticism had already begun to erode that foundation. People still used religious language, still went to church, still spoke of morality, but in their hearts, many no longer truly believed. This is what Nietzsche meant. Not that God literally died, but that the idea of God, as the source of ultimate truth and value, had lost its power, humanity, without even realizing it, had killed him, and with that death came a great danger. Nietzsche warned that if we take away God, we also take away the structure that held human life together. Without a higher authority, without eternal truths, without absolute values, what remains? A terrifying emptiness, a void. He foresaw what he called nihilism, the belief that life has no meaning, no purpose, no direction. He saw this not as a distant possibility, but as an approaching storm. If God is gone, then who are we? Why are we here? What does it mean to live, to suffer, to love, to create? Imagine, for a moment, standing in a vast desert at night. The stars that once guided travelers have vanished. The horizon is endless, but directionless. There is no map, no compass, no guiding light. That is the human condition after the death of God. Nietzsche did not celebrate this death. In fact, he described it with anguish, with dread. He knew how deeply unsettling it would be. Humanity, he said, would wander, lost, uncertain. Perhaps for centuries. And yet Nietzsche also saw this crisis as a possibility, a chance. If the old values had crumbled, Perhaps it was time to create new ones, if the old meaning had vanished. Perhaps it was time for us to forge our own meaning, but this task would not be easy. It would demand courage, creativity, and a willingness to confront the abyss without flinching. As you drift here, lying in the quiet, let these words settle in you like a slow tide. Meaning is not something handed down, ready-made, waiting for us. It is something we carve out. Something we breathe into existence. The loss of old certainties may feel like darkness. But in that darkness lies the possibility of a new dawn. The will to power. At the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy lies a concept both mysterious and electrifying. The will to power. To understand it is to glimpse how he saw life itself, raw, restless, always striving. When most philosophers before Nietzsche looked at human beings, they thought in terms of survival or reason. They believed we lived mainly to preserve ourselves, to seek pleasure, or to avoid pain. But Nietzsche looked deeper for him. Life was not content with mere survival. Life wanted more. It wanted to expand, to express, to overcome, to grow, to dominate its limitations. This inner drive, this endless reaching beyond what is, Nietzsche called the will to power. It is not just a desire for control over others, though it can take that form. It is a more profound force, the impulse within every living thing to shape itself, to transform the world round it, to become more than it currently is. Think of a seed buried in the soil. It does not remain still. It breaks open, pushes upward, struggles against the weight of earth, reaching for the sun. That struggle, that growth, is the will to power at work. Or think of a musician who spends years in solitude, shaping notes into symphonies. That too is the will to power, the transformation of struggle into beauty. Nietzsche believed that this drive was more fundamental than the search for pleasure or happiness. In fact, he thought happiness was only a byproduct of power, of being able to express, to create, to overcome. A bird in flight is not happy because it seeks pleasure. It is happy because it does what its nature demands, to soar. The will to power, then, is about becoming who we are meant to be. It is about refusing to stay small, refusing to live only in comfort, refusing to settle into mediocrity. It is about constant movement, constant growth, constant self-overcoming. Yet Nietzsche also saw a danger here. For not all expressions of the will to power are noble. Some people, weak in themselves, express it by trying to dominate or diminish others. They seek control not to grow, but to hide their own insecurity. Nietzsche despised this. He admired instead those who turned their power inward, who conquered themselves, who created, who gave form to chaos, who built values out of strength rather than resentment. And so he asked us, how do we channel this energy? Do we use our will to power destructively, to drag others down, to complain, to resent? Or do we use it creatively, to rise above our struggles, to shape our lives like artists shaping a canvas? As you rest here, drifting between wakefulness and sleep, imagine that deep inside you burns this restless flame, the will to power. It is not something foreign, not something Nietzsche invented. It is in your breath, in your heartbeat, in your desire to live and become more. It is your essence. And, like the seed pushing toward the light, it is always asking you, what more could you become? The eternal return. Among all of Nietzsche's ideas, perhaps none is more haunting, more unsettling, and more beautiful than the thought experiment he called the eternal return. He asks us to imagine this. What if one night, as you lie half asleep, a spirit came to you and whispered, "This life, as you live it now and as you have lived it before, you will have to live again, and again, and again, countless times, without end. Every joy, every sorrow, every mistake, every triumph repeated, exactly the same, again and again, for all eternity. How would you react? Would you curse the spirit? Despair at the thought of having to relive every pain, every failure? Or would you embrace it with joy, grateful for the chance to live your life endlessly? Down to the smallest detail. For most people, the thought is terrifying. To live once is already heavy enough while repeated infinitely. But Nietzsche's challenge is this: if you can affirm your life so completely, if you can love your fate amor fati so deeply, that you would will its eternal repetition, then you have achieved the highest strength of spirit. You have become not just a survivor of life, but its lover. Think about it. We often wish to escape our past. We regret decisions. We mourn mistakes. We long to rewrite our stories. The eternal return tells us, no, you cannot erase them. You must embrace them, wholly, eternally, for they are part of you, inseparable from the joys and strengths you now hold. Nietzsche is asking us for a radical affirmation, not to want life to be different, not to want an easier fate, but to embrace it so fully that we would welcome its endless repetition. Imagine, lying here now, that your whole life, its laughter, its pain, its quiet moments was placed before you, on a loop that never ends. Could you say yes to it? Could you say, this is enough, this is mine, and I love it? That is the spirit of eternal return. It is not about cosmic cycles. It is about the depth of your yes. It is about loving life so fiercely that even its darkest nights are worth reliving. Forever. And as you drift deeper into calmness, Nietzsche's whisper lingers like a slow echo. Can you live in such a way that you would gladly do it all again? The Übermensch and self-overcoming. For Nietzsche, the death of God, the will to power, and the eternal return were not ends in themselves. They were stages on the path towards something greater, the vision of the Übermensch. Often translated as the Overman or Superman, the Übermensch is not a tyrant, not a conqueror in the crude sense. It is not about domination over others. Instead, it is about self-mastery, self-creation, self-overcoming. The Übermensch is the human being who has faced the abyss of nihilism, who has recognized the death of old values and instead of collapsing into despair, has risen to create new ones. Nietzsche saw most people living in what he called the state of the last man. The last man is comfortable, safe, mediocre. He avoids risk, avoids pain, avoids striving. He just wants an easy life. Without great highs or great lows, the last man says, we have invented happiness, and he smiles. Dull and content, while life's deeper possibilities slip past him. The Übermensch is the opposite of this. The Übermensch embraces life's struggle. He or she turns suffering into strength, chaos into order, despair into creation. The Übermensch lives with courage, shaping life like an artist shaping clay. This, Nietzsche thought, was the true dignity of human beings, not to cling to ready-made truths, not to live in the shadow of old gods, but to stand upright in the storm of existence and carve new meaning from it. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind howling, the earth falling away into a vast abyss. Most would step back, trembling. But the Übermensch steps forward not to fall, but to fly, to risk, to dare, to create. And perhaps, as you lie here in stillness, you can feel the seed of this idea inside you. Every moment you choose courage over comfort, growth over safety, creation over despair, you step closer to this ideal. You do not need to be perfect, or heroic, or flawless. You only need to be willing to overcome yourself, again and again, in small ways and in great ones. For Nietzsche, the Übermensch was not just a philosophical figure, it was a call. a challenge, a dream of what humanity could become, in the ashes of old values, in the silence after God's death. In the shadow of nihilism, he pointed us toward this vision, the possibility of becoming creators of our own lives. As you drift further into rest, remember, you are not static, you are becoming, always becoming, and within you lies the power to rise, to create, to overcome. Default text. It is easy to imagine Nietzsche as only the bold thinker, the fiery writer, the daring challenger of tradition, but behind his words was a man who lived through extraordinary suffering. And in many ways, his struggles were the soil from which his philosophy grew. From an early age, Nietzsche's life was marked by pain. His father, a Lutheran pastor, died when Nietzsche was only 4. Soon after, his younger brother also passed away. Loss weighed on him before he was old enough to understand what loss truly meant. He was raised in a house filled with women his mother, grandmother, and aunts, and though they cared for him deeply, he grew up with the shadow of death always near. As a young man, Nietzsche showed extraordinary brilliance. He became, at just 24 years old, the youngest professor of classical philology ever appointed at the University of Basel. But his health began to fail almost immediately. He suffered from migraines so severe that they left him bedridden for days. His eyesight deteriorated until he was nearly blind. His stomach rebelled against food, and he endured long stretches of isolation, unable to work, unable to even stand without pain. It was in these moments, broken, fragile, alone, that Nietzsche wrote many of his most powerful works. He wandered the mountains of Switzerland, hunched against the wind, scribbling thoughts that would shake the foundations of philosophy. His words did not come from comfort, but from the crucible of suffering. And then came loneliness. Nietzsche longed for companionship, for love, for someone who would share his vision. But he was rejected by those he cared for most. He proposed marriage 3 times to the same woman, Lou Salome, and was refused each time. His friendships, including with the composer Richard Wagner, often ended in betrayal or disillusionment. He spent much of his life alone, misunderstood, unappreciated, and dismissed as a madman. Yet Nietzsche did not let suffering crush him. He turned it into insight. He once said, "Out of life's school of war, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger." For him, pain was not merely something to endure. It was a teacher. It stripped away illusions, tested strength, and forced him to confront the deepest truths about existence. And isn't that the heart of his lesson for us? That we, too, will suffer, we, too, will lose, will eke, will struggle. But suffering is not the end. It can be the beginning of wisdom. If we dare to face it, Nietzsche's own life shows that even in illness, loneliness, and despair, one can still create, still affirm, still rise. As you lie here, drifting, imagine Nietzsche in his small, dim room, barely able to see, yet writing words that would echo through centuries. Imagine his solitude, his silence, his pain, and then realize it was from this place of brokenness that he created strength, perhaps. In your own difficulties, your own quiet battles, there lies the same seed, the possibility of transformation. And so, we return to the question we began with. What was Nietzsche really trying to teach us? His philosophy was not an easy comfort. It was not meant to soothe with illusions of paradise or promises of perfect justice. No, Nietzsche wanted us to face life as it is, raw, difficult, uncertain, often cruel. He wanted us to strip away the masks of false hope and confront the abyss directly. But he did not leave us in despair. He gave us tools. He gave us images. He gave us challenges that could transform despair into strength. He told us that suffering is not an enemy, but a sculptor chiseling us into greater beings. He told us that the death of God was not merely a loss, but a chance to create new meaning. He told us of the will to power the flame of life within us that longs to grow, to create, to overcome. He whispered the thought of eternal return, asking us to love our lives so deeply that we would live them again and again. And he pointed us toward the Übermensch, the figure of self-overcoming, the one who transforms chaos into order, suffering into beauty, despair into creation. But perhaps most of all, Nietzsche's lesson is this: say yes to life. Say yes, even when it is hard. Say yes, even when you cannot see the way forward. Say yes to your fate, to your struggles, to your joys, to your very being. To live fully and fiercely is to embrace existence in all its forms, and to love it not in spite of its difficulties, but because of them. As you drift deeper now, closer to rest, imagine Nietzsche's voice as a quiet presence beside you, not a harsh command, not a sharp challenge, but a gentle reminder: you are stronger than you think. Your pain is not meaningless. Your life is not empty. You have within you the power to create, to transform, to overcome. Let these words wrap round you like a blanket. You are becoming, always becoming, and with each breath, each dream, each tomorrow, you carry within you the possibility of saying the deepest yes. Rest, now, with this thought: life, in all its weight, in all its beauty, is yours, and to live it fully, courageously, lovingly is the greatest philosophy of all.